He came to the diner to escape his grief, but never expected a waitress crawling on the floor to give his broken son back his voice. Ethan Caldwell lived in a world most people only saw in movies. His home sat high above the Seattle skyline, all glass and steel, with a view that stretched forever. Inside, everything was perfect polished floors, silent staff, furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. He wore custom suits, flew on private jets, and signed deals that moved markets. To the outside world, he had it all. But inside, his life felt hollow. 2 years ago, his wife Leo's mother had died suddenly in a car accident. From that day on, something in their home broke. Not the furniture or the art, but the quiet rhythm of love that used to fill the rooms, his son. Leo was only 4 when it happened. After the funeral, the boy stopped talking. Not completely, but almost. He'd nod or shake his head, sometimes whisper a word, but mostly he stayed silent, lost in a world only he could see. Doctors called it trauma-induced selective mutism. Therapists came and went. Playrooms were built, specialists consulted, routines adjusted, but nothing reached him. Ethan tried everything he knew: expensive toys, trips to exotic places, even hiring a child psychologist who flew in from London. But Leo remained distant, like a bird that had folded its wings and refused to fly. Ethan felt helpless. He could command boardrooms and launch billion-dollar companies, but he couldn't make his own son smile. The guilt ate at him. He'd been working late the night of the accident. She'd called to say she was picking up Leo from his grandparents. He'd said, "Drive safe," and gone back to his emails. Those were the last words he ever spoke to her, one rainy Saturday. Desperate for a change of scenery and maybe a miracle, Ethan decided to take Leo somewhere completely ordinary. No luxury, no staff, no expectations. He drove to a small diner on the edge of the city, the kind of place with chipped mugs, sticky booths, and a jukebox in the corner. It was called Maggie's Corner, named after the owner who'd passed it down to her daughter. Ethan had never been there before. He didn't even know the name until he saw the faded sign from the road inside. The air smelled like coffee, bacon, and something warm, maybe cinnamon. People laughed over pancakes. A group of construction workers joked at the counter. It felt alive in a way his penthouse never did. They sat in a corner booth. Leo clutched his stuffed rabbit and stared at the floor, as usual. Ethan ordered coffee and toast, not really hungry, just hoping the change of environment might help. That's when Mara came over. She moved with quiet efficiency. Her dark hair pulled back, a faint smile on her face, even though her eyes looked tired. She had a name tag that read Mara, and a small stain on her apron, probably from the morning rush. She didn't gawk at Ethan like others might have. She didn't recognize him, and that was a relief. To her, he was just another customer with a quiet kid. "Hey there," she said softly, crouching slightly so she was closer to Leo's eye level. "I'm Mara. You like blueberry pancakes? We make 'em with real berries." Leo didn't answer. He tucked his chin into his chest. "That's okay," she said, not pushing. "No rush. Just thought I'd ask." Ethan watched, surprised. Most people either ignored Leo or tried too hard to fix him. Mara didn't either. She treated him like a person, not a problem. When their food came, Leo barely touched it. But he watched Mara as she moved around the diner, refilling coffee. Laughing with an old man in a trucker hat, gently scolding a teenager who spilled syrup. There was a kindness in her movements, a steadiness. Ethan noticed how she paused to help a little girl tie her shoe, how she remembered a regular's order without asking, after they ate. Ethan paid the bill, leaving, a generous tip more out of habit than thought. As they walked out, Leo suddenly stopped near the door. He turned and looked back inside. Mara was wiping a table, humming under her breath. Leo just stared. "Do you want to come back?" Ethan asked, surprised. Leo gave the tiniest nod, and so they did. The next weekend, same time, and the one after that. Ethan didn't tell anyone. He didn't bring bodyguards or assistants. It was just him, Leo, and the quiet rhythm of the diner. Each time, Mara greeted them like old friends, never making a fuss. She'd leave crayons and paper on their table. Sometimes she'd draw a silly picture: a cat wearing sunglasses, dog driving a bus, and slide it over when Leo wasn't looking. Slowly, Leo started leaving his own drawings in return. A rabbit, a car. Once a heart, Ethan began to see his son differently. Not as a broken child to be fixed, but as someone waiting to be met where he was. And Mara, without even trying, was doing that. He also started noticing things about her. The way she rubbed her lower back after a long shift. How she saved the last piece of pie for a homeless man who came by every Friday. That she always carried a small notebook filled not with doodles but with medical terms. One day he overheard her on the phone outside. "Yeah, Dad, I'll bring your meds tonight. Don't worry about the rent, I've got it." She was carrying the world on her shoulders, and still had kindness to spare. Ethan, who'd spent years believing success meant control and power, felt something shift inside him. Maybe real strength wasn't about building empires, but about showing up, quietly, for the people who needed you. He didn't know it yet, but that small diner, with its chipped plates and warm light, was becoming the place where everything began to change, not just for Leo, but for all of them. It was their fourth visit to the diner when everything shifted. The place was busier than usual. Saturday morning rush, kids shouting, coffee machines hissing, the clatter of plates. Leo had been doing better. He'd even said blueberry the week before, pointing at his pancake with a shy smile. But today, the noise was too much. Bright sunlight bounced off the chrome edges of the counter. A blender roared in the kitchen. Someone dropped a tray of silverware with a loud crash. Leo froze. His small hands gripped the edge of the table. His breathing got fast and shallow. Then, without warning, he slid off the booth and dropped to the floor, curling into a tight ball near the leg of the table. He covered his ears and shut his eyes tight, rocking back and forth. It wasn't a tantrum, it was panic. His whole body screamed too much, too loud, too fast. Ethan's heart pounded. He'd seen this before at home, in malls, once during a school tour, but never here, never in public. He crouched down, voice low. "Leo, buddy, it's okay. We can go." But Leo didn't move. He didn't even open his eyes. Ethan reached out, but the boy flinched away. Helplessness washed over him again, sharp and familiar. He didn't know what to do. Should he pick him up? Carry him out? Would that make it worse? Just then, Mara appeared. She'd been taking an order at the next table, but the moment she saw Leo on the floor, she set her notepad down and walked over. "Come." Quiet, no rush. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say, "What's wrong?" or "Are you okay?" Instead, she simply knelt beside Leo, not too close, not too far. She stayed low, keeping her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Hey, Leo," she said gently. "The world's being loud today, huh?" He didn't answer, but his rocking slowed just a little. Mara didn't try to pull him up or force him to look at her. Instead, she did something unexpected. She sat all the way down on the worn linoleum floor, crossed her legs, and leaned against the booth. Then, slowly, she ducked her head and crawled under the table right into the small, shadowy space where Leo had retreated. Ethan watched, stunned. From his angle, he could see them both, now Mara on her hands and knees, facing Leo, who was still curled up. She didn't speak. She just hummed. A soft, wordless tune, warm and steady, like a lullaby without words. It wasn't loud. It didn't fight the noise outside. It just existed, a quiet island in the storm. And then, something miraculous happened. Leo opened one eye. He peeked at her. Mara kept humming, her eyes kind, her body relaxed. She didn't reach for him. She just stayed there in his space, matching his world instead of dragging him into hers. After a long moment, Leo uncurled a little. He sat up, still under the table, still in the dim safety of that hidden spot. He watched Mara. She smiled, just a small lift of her lips, and then, very slowly, she began to crawl backward, deeper under the table, like she was exploring a secret tunnel. Leo blinked. Then, almost without thinking, he got on his hands and knees too. He followed her. They crawled together, side by side, in that narrow space between the booth and the floor. Mara made soft animal sounds, a quiet meow, a gentle woof, and Leo let out a tiny giggle. Not a full laugh, but a breathy sound Ethan hadn't heard in over a year. His chest tightened. From outside the booth, the diner kept buzzing, orders called, chairs scraped, coffee poured. But under that table, time slowed. It was just two people, moving slowly, quietly, like explorers in a cave only they could see. Mara never rushed. She let Leo set the pace. When he paused, she paused. When he looked back at his dad, she gave Ethan a small, reassuring nod. Ethan stayed where he was, kneeling beside the booth, tears burning behind his eyes. He wasn't part of this moment, and that was okay. For the first time, he understood that helping Leo didn't always mean fixing him. Sometimes it meant stepping back and letting someone else meet him where he was. After a few minutes, Mara gently backed out from under the table and sat cross-legged on the floor. Leo followed, crawling out slowly, blinking in the light. He didn't run back to his dad. Instead, he sat beside Mara, leaning slightly against her arm. She didn't flinch or pull away. She just let him be there. "Want to draw a dragon?" she asked softly. Pulling a crumpled paper and a stubby crayon from her apron pocket, Leo nodded. They sat on the floor together, drawing while the world moved around them. Ethan ordered 2 hot chocolate Sleos with extra marshmallows, just how he used to like them before everything changed. When Mara brought them over, Leo looked up and whispered, "Thank you." Mara smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Anytime, Explorer." Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the scene in his head, the way Mara hadn't tried to rescue Leo, but had simply joined him in his fear. She didn't treat his silence like a flaw. She treated it like a language, and she'd learned to speak it. The next morning, he called his assistant and canceled 3 meetings. He didn't care about quarterly projections or investor calls. All he could think about was that moment under the table, the moment his son had chosen to move forward. Not because he was pushed, but because someone crawled beside him. He started researching. Not about business, but about trauma, about sensory overload, about how children like Leo needed safety before they could heal. He read articles, watched videos, even called a child therapist, not for advice on fixing Leo, but on how to support him better. And he kept taking Leo to the diner to each visit. Mara greeted them like nothing extraordinary had happened. But Ethan saw the way she watched Leo now, with pity, but with quiet attention. She remembered his favorite seat, his fear of the blender noise, how he liked his toast cut into triangles. She never made a big deal out of his progress, but she noticed it. And Leo noticed that she noticed. One afternoon, as they left, Leo turned and waved at Mara. Just a small wave, fingers barely moving. But it was enough. Ethan's throat tightened. He began to see Mara differently, too. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who understood pain, someone who knew how to hold space for broken things without trying to glue them back together too fast. Her kindness wasn't performative, was steady, like a heartbeat. And in that simple act of crawling on a diner floor, she'd done what billions of dollars and the best doctors in the world couldn't. She'd given Leo a reason to come back. Ethan didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, he felt hope not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet hum under the table, waiting to be heard. After that day under the table, everything shifted, but not all at once. It wasn't like a movie where one moment fixes everything. Instead, it was slow, like sunrise, quiet, steady, and full of small light. Ethan kept bringing Leo to the diner every Saturday morning. Same booth, same order, blueberry pancakes for Leo, black coffee for him. And every time Mara was there, not making a big deal out of anything, just smiling like they were old friends who'd known each other forever. But something had changed between them. Before, Ethan had seen Mara as part of the background, just the woman who brought the coffee. Now, he really saw her. He noticed how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was tired. How she always saved the last piece of banana bread for the elderly man who came in every Friday. How her hands were rough from washing dishes, but gentle when she handed Leo a crayon. She carried weight, her dad's illness, her bills, her dreams, but she never let it make her hard. One afternoon, as they left the diner, Leo tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Can Mara come to the park with us?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to overstep. But before he could answer, Mara, who'd walked them to the door like she sometimes did, smiled. "Only if you promise not to challenge me to a race." "I lose every time," Leo grinned, the real kind, with crinkles around his eyes. And that was that, so it began. Not as a plan, not as a strategy, but as something simple. Friendship. Mara started joining them for walks in the park after her shift. She'd bring a thermos of tea, sit on a bench while Leo climbed trees or chased pigeons, and talk with Ethan about everything and nothing books she liked. Places she'd never been, how much she hated folding fitted sheets. He found himself laughing more than he had in years. Not the polite laugh he used in boardrooms, but the kind that came from the belly, unexpected and real. Leo thrived. He started speaking more, not in long speeches, but in little bursts. "Mara, look. A squirrel with a hat. It was just a leaf, Dad. Can we build a fort like the one under the table?" He began drawing pictures of the three of them always together, always smiling. One day, he handed Mara a drawing of a woman with wings. "That's you," he said. "You help people fly." Mara blinked fast, turned away to hide her tears, and whispered, "I think you're the one flying, Leo." But trust doesn't grow overnight, especially when pain runs deep. One evening, Mara noticed Ethan watching her too closely, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. She stopped him gently. "You don't have to fix me, Ethan, and I'm not here to fix Leo. I'm just..." Here he nodded, but part of him still wanted to do something, buy her a car, pay off her debts, build her a better life. That was how he'd always solved problems, with money. So one night after Leo was asleep, he quietly paid off the medical bills her father had been drowning in. He used a fake name, made it look like a charity grant. He thought she'd never find out, but Mara did. A week later, she showed up at the diner with a letter from the hospital bills marked paid in full. Her hands were shaking. She found Ethan in the parking lot after their usual visit. "Did you do this?" she asked, voice low but firm. He didn't deny it. "I just wanted to help." "I know," she said. "But helping isn't always about giving things. Sometimes it's about letting people carry their own weight, just not alone." He felt ashamed. He'd thought he was being kind, but he'd taken away her choice, her dignity. "I'm sorry," he said, truly meaning it. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Don't be sorry. Just ask next time." From then on, he did. When he wanted to help, he asked. When he didn't understand, he listened. And slowly, something real began to grow. Not romance. Not obligation, but a bond built on respect. One rainy afternoon, Mara agreed to come to their apartment not as staff. Not as a guest, but as someone Leo asked for. She brought coloring books and played quiet games with him-building towers out of blocks, making shadow puppets with a flashlight. Ethan watched from the kitchen, washing dishes he didn't need to wash just to give them space. But through the doorway, he saw Leo lean his head on Mara's shoulder during a story. Saw her rest her chin gently on his hair. Saw peace. Later, over tea, Mara asked, "Why do you keep coming back? You could hire the best child therapists in the world." Ethan looked at his son, now asleep on the couch with his rabbit. "Because therapists see a case." "You see, my son?" She didn't reply right away. Then she said, "My little brother. He was like Leo, quiet, scared of loud noises. We didn't have money for help. He never got the chance to. Come back," her voice cracked. "So when I see Leo, I see him. And I want Leo to have what he didn't." That was the moment Ethan truly understood. This wasn't charity. It was healing for both of them. He started reading about sensory processing, about childhood trauma, about how silence isn't emptiness. It's often a safe place a child builds when the world feels too dangerous. He stopped trying to pull Leo out and started learning how to step into his world instead. Mara, in turn, began to open up. She told him about her dream of becoming a nurse, how she studied during breaks, how scared she was she'd fail. He didn't offer to pay for school, not yet. Instead, he helped her find free online resources, connected her with a retired professor who tutored for free, even let her use his quiet home office to study when her apartment was too noisy. Their lives began to weave, together not tangled but braided, separate threads stronger together. One Saturday, Leo didn't want to leave the park. "Can Mara come home with us?" he asked, eyes wide with hope. Mara looked at Ethan, unsure. He smiled. "Only if you stay for dinner?" "I promise not to burn the pasta." "Much." She laughed, and that night they ate spaghetti at the kitchen table, Leo telling wild stories about talking dogs, Mara teasing Ethan about his fancy salt shaker, and Ethan realizing with a quiet joy that this messy, ordinary evening was the richest thing he'd ever owned. No cameras, no headlines. Just three people finding their way back to light, one quiet moment at a time. It started with a blurry photo. Someone had snapped a picture through the diner window Ethan in his expensive coat, Mara in her uniform, Leo kneeling between them on the floor, crayons scattered around. The caption read, "Billionaire plays house with diner girl while his empire crumbles." By morning, it was everywhere. Tabloids, gossip blogs, even a segment on a morning news show. They called Mara a gold digger in aprons. Said she was using a vulnerable child to climb the social ladder. One article claimed she'd manipulated the grieving tycoon with fake kindness. Saw it on his phone before breakfast? His stomach dropped. He deleted the notifications, but the damage was done. His assistant called within the hour. "Sir, the board is asking for a statement. There are concerns about optics and your judgment." He wanted to scream. This wasn't about optics. It was about his son finally laughing again. But in the world he lived in, feelings didn't matter. Perception did. Things got worse fast. Mara showed up for her evening shift to find her schedule cut in half. The diner's owner, Maggie, pulled her aside, eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry, Mara. People are talking. Regulars are asking questions. I can't afford the drama." Mara didn't argue. She just nodded, tucked her apron into her bag, and walked out into the rain. That same week, a woman in a neat suit showed up at Ethan's penthouse. She introduced herself as a caseworker from Child Protective Services. An anonymous tip had been filed, claiming Leo was being exposed to unstable, unvetted individuals and that his emotional state was being exploited for personal gain. Ethan sat through the interview in stunned silence. He answered every question calmly, handed over therapy records, school reports, even video clips of Leo playing with Mariowa supervised, always safe. The caseworker left without saying much. But the message was clear. His private life was no longer private, and his choices were being watched. Mara faced her own storm. Online, strangers called her names. Someone posted her phone number. She got texts like, "Know your place and stay away from rich men's kids." Her landlord suddenly demanded proof of income for the next 6 months. Her father, weak from dialysis, asked if she'd gotten into trouble. She lied and said no. She thought about quitting. Not just the diner, everything. Maybe move cities. Start over. She didn't sign up for this. She'd only ever wanted to help a quiet boy who reminded her of her younger brother, lost years ago to an illness they couldn't afford to treat. But then Leo called, not on the phone. Ethan had given her a small, prepaid cell just for emergencies. That evening, as she sat on her fire escape eating cold rice, the phone buzzed. It was a voice note. She pressed play, Mara. Leo's voice, soft but clear. "Are you coming back? I drew you a spaceship. It has a kitchen, so you can make pancakes in space. Dad says you're busy, but I miss you." Her eyes filled with tears. She played it again. And again. The next day, she went to the park where Ethan had started bringing Leo for their adventures, a quiet spot near the lake. Far from cameras, she didn't tell anyone. She just showed up, sitting on a bench with a sketch pad pretending to draw ducks. Leo spotted her first. He froze, then broke into a run. He didn't say a word, just threw his arms around her legs and held on tight. Ethan stood a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. "I didn't know what else to do," he said quietly. "He hasn't slept through the night since you stopped coming." Mara knelt and hugged Leo properly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to cause trouble." "You didn't," Leo said, pulling back just enough to look at her. "The trouble people are mean." She almost laughed. Kids saw the truth so clearly, but the pressure didn't stop. A business partner pulled Ethan aside at a charity gala. "People are saying you've lost focus. That grief's made you soft." Another warned that investors were nervous. "You're letting a waitress dictate your family life? It looks weak." Ethan had spent his life being called ruthless, brilliant, cold, but never weak. Now, the thing that felt most human, caring for his son in the only way that was working, was being twisted into a flaw. One night, after tucking Leo in, he sat alone in the dark living room. Scrolling through cruel headlines, he thought about shutting it all down, sending Mara money, disappearing with Leo to a private island, building walls so high no one could see in. But then he remembered Leo's voice. "The trouble people are mean." He realized something. Running wouldn't fix it. Silence wouldn't fix it. The only way out was through. So he did something he'd never done before. He spoke without a script. He called a reporter he trusted, not from a tabloid, but from a real news outlet, agreed to a short interview. No PR team, no filters. Just him, in his living room wearing a plain sweater. With Leo's drawings taped to the fridge behind him, the reporter asked the hard questions. "Are you involved with Mara Reyes?" "No," Ethan said. "We're not romantically involved. We never have been." "Then why is she spending so much time with your son?" "Because she sees him," Ethan replied, voice thick. "Not the billionaire's son. Not the traumatized child the therapists label him as. Just Leo, and when he's with her, he's not broken. He's just a kid." He paused, looked directly into the camera. "I used to think love was something you provided: big houses, the best schools, the right doctors. But watching Mara with Leo taught me that real care isn't about giving things. It's about showing up. On the floor, in the mess, without expecting anything back." He didn't defend himself. He didn't attack the critics. He just told the truth. The interview went live the next morning. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic music. Just a tired man talking about his son and the waitress who helped him find his voice again. The response surprised everyone. Thousands of parents of neurodivergent kids shared it. Teachers, therapists, single moms working double shifts, they all wrote, "This is what real support looks like." Even some of Ethan's fiercest critics softened. One investor emailed, "I lost my daughter to depression. I wish someone had crawled under the table for her." The anonymous tip to child services was dropped. No evidence of wrongdoing, just gossip. The diner's owner called Mara, ashamed, and offered her old hours back. She said no. She'd already applied to nursing school, but she thanked her anyway. Most importantly, Leo started sleeping again. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday, Mara brought over a batch of blueberry muffins, Leo's favorite. Ethan opened the door, and Leo came running before she'd even stepped inside. They sat on the floor of the living room, just like under the diner table. Drawing a map to an imaginary planet where everyone spoke in hums and kindness was the only currency. Ethan watched them, leaning against the doorway. He didn't feel like a billionaire in that moment. He didn't feel powerful or important. He just felt grateful for a woman who crawled on a dirty floor without hesitation. For a son who was learning to trust the world again, and for the messy, beautiful truth that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is get down on your hands and knees and meet someone where they are. The noise outside hadn't stopped. The world still watched, still judged. But inside that room, none of it mattered. Because here, under the soft light of a quiet afternoon, everything was exactly as it should be. The headlines faded faster than anyone expected. One week it was Billionaire's secret diner romance. The next, it was a celebrity divorce or a tech scandal, something shinier, something louder. The world moved on. But for Ethan, Leo, and Mara, Life didn't go back to how it was before. It moved forwards lower, quieter, and somehow richer. Mara didn't take the money Ethan offered, not at first. When he'd quietly arranged a full scholarship for her to attend nursing school, she'd stared at the letter for a long time, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "Why?" she'd asked. "You don't owe me anything," Ethan had shaken his head. "It's not about owing. It's about believing in you. You've already given Leo more than I ever could. Let me help you build your dream, the way you helped him find his voice." She agreed, but only on one condition: no fancy private colleges, no special treatment. She'd go to the local community college, take night classes, keep working part-time at a clinic. She wanted to earn it, not just receive it. Ethan respected that. And so every Tuesday and Thursday evening, after her shift at the clinic, Mara would sit at the library with textbooks open, highlighter in hand, sipping cheap coffee from a thermos. Sometimes Leo would come with Ethan to study nearby, doing his own homework at the next table. Glancing over now and then to make sure she was still there, Leo was different now. Not fixed, Ethan had stopped thinking in those terms, but alive in a way he hadn't been in years. He talked. Not constantly, not like other kids his age, but when he had something to say, he said it. He asked questions. He told jokes, silly, knock-knock ones that made Mara laugh until she snorted. He even started school properly, not just attending but participating. His teacher said he'd drawn a picture of his 3 favorite people and hung it on the classroom wall. A tall man in a suit, a woman with curly hair and a stethoscope, and a small boy holding both their hands. Ethan changed too. He still ran his company, but he'd stepped back from the day-to-day chaos. He hired a CEO he trusted and kept only the big decisions for himself. He traded late-night conference calls for bedtime stories. He learned how to make pancakes badly at first, but Leo ate them anyway. He walked Leo to school most mornings, holding his small hand, listening to stories about dragons and space robots. He even started going to parent-teacher meetings, not with an assistant taking notes, but just him in a wrinkled shirt, asking real questions. He and Mara never became a couple. There was no grand romance, no dramatic confession under the stars. What they had was something rarer: deep, quiet trust. They were 2 people who'd seen each other at their lowest and chose to walk beside each other anyway. They shared meals, not dates. They shared worries about Leo's progress, not love letters. And that was enough. One Saturday morning, months after the storm had passed, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and toast. He found Leo and Mara in the kitchen. She was teaching him how to scramble eggs, his small hands gripping the spatula, her hands gently guiding his. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. The radio played soft jazz in the background. It was ordinary, and it was perfect. Leo looked up when Ethan entered. "Mara says eggs need love," he announced seriously. "So I'm giving them extra," Mara laughed, wiping her hands on a towel. "I said they need patience, but love works too." Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching them. This was what he'd been missing all along. Not perfection, not control, just presence. Just people who showed up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Later that day, Leo handed Mara a drawing. It was on thick construction paper, colored with careful strokes. 3 stick figures stood under a table just like the one at the diner. The tallest had a tie, the middle one had curly hair and a heart on her shirt, and the smallest held a rabbit. Above them, in wobbly letters, it said, "My people." Mara's eyes filled with tears. She didn't say anything. She just hugged Leo tight, then taped the drawing to her fridge at home, right next to her class schedule and a photo of her dad. Ethan didn't buy her a mansion or a luxury car. Instead, he helped her find a small 2-bedroom apartment closer to the college safe. Quiet, with a little balcony where she could drink tea after long shifts. He didn't make a show of it. He just made a few calls, handled the paperwork, and handed her the keys one afternoon. "For you and your dad," he'd said simply. She'd hugged him then briefly. Gratefully, and that meant more than any business deal ever had. Leo started therapy again, but this time it was different. He wasn't going because he was broken. He was going to learn how to understand his feelings, how to handle loud places, how to say when he needed a break. And sometimes, when things got hard, he'd whisper, "Can we go under the table?" And Mara or Ethan would find a quiet corner, sit on the floor with him, and just be there. The world still saw Ethan as a billionaire. But at home, he was just dad. And Mara wasn't the waitress anymore. To Leo, she was Mara, who knows how to fix boo-boos and draw dragons. To Ethan, she was the person who taught him that love isn't about grand gestures, it's about showing up. Again and again, even when it's messy. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, Leo asked, "Are we a family?" Ethan and Mara exchanged a look, not awkward, not forced, just honest. Mara smiled. "Families don't always look the same, Leo. Some have moms and dads. Some have just one parent. Some have grandparents or aunts or friends who love you like family." Leo thought for a moment. "So we're a family." Ethan put an arm around him. "Yeah, buddy, we are." It wasn't traditional. It wasn't what anyone expected. But it was real. Years later, when Leo was older, he'd tell people the story of the day Mara crawled under the table with him. He'd say it wasn't magic. It was just kindness. And kindness, he'd learned, could change everything. Mara graduated with honors, became a pediatric nurse, and worked at a community clinic where she treated kids who couldn't afford fancy doctors. She never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, so she always knelt to talk to her young patients. Always listened, always saw them. Ethan never remarried. He didn't need to. He had a son who laughed again, a friend who understood him without words, and a life that finally felt like his own, not the one the world expected, but the one he'd chosen. And every now and then, on quiet weekends, the three of them would go back to Maggie's Corner. The diner hadn't changed much. Same chipped mugs, same sticky booths. They'd sit in their usual corner, order blueberry pancakes. Sometimes, just for old time's sake, Leo would crawl under the table, and Mara would follow, humming that same soft tune. Ethan would watch them, sipping his coffee, and smile. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was theirs. And in a world full of noise, that quiet connection was the most powerful thing of all.